My name is Jeffrey Herbst, and I am president of American Jewish University in Los Angeles. It's a tremendous pleasure and honor to welcome Natan Sharansky and Gil Troy to our platform today. Natan, of course, Soviet dissident, Israeli politician, and head of the Jewish Agency. He's published his book with Gil called Never Alone, Prison, Politics, and My People, and was celebrating the paperback edition, and Gil will show the Hebrew edition of the book that's just come out. Natan today is active in a variety of organizations that are combating anti-Semitism. Dr. Gil Troy is a distinguished historian of both American history and Zionism, affiliated with McGill University, and also a Jerusalem Post columnist. Natan, Gil, welcome to the Maven platform. Thank you for joining us. Both are in Jerusalem today.
Thank you.
Honored to be with you.
Natan and Gil, I wanted to talk to you about current developments in Israel, both because they're of such tremendous importance and interest to Jews worldwide, but also because, Natan, so much of your life has been devoted to promoting democracy and the unity of the Jewish people. I was wondering if we could start with Natan. How do you understand the current controversy about judicial reform in Israel, the enormous protests that have come about in recent months, and where do you see the path to the future?
First of all, I want to say that the conflict is real. And in fact, it's not the conflict between left and right as in the last 30, 40 years, when there were those who believed that we have to have peace immediately, giving all types of concessions, and those who believe that we should take care of our security and not about concessions. Because that debate was a little bit abstract, because this solution, those questions needed a real partner. And it was not clear if we have this partner. At this moment, there is a fear on two sides of Israeli society. One part suspects that, or is afraid that we will become less democratic, and the others that will become less Jewish. So it's debate about Jewish democratic character of the state. And here you don't need any other partner but yourself, but your people. So it is real debate inside between us. There is some fear and anger on both sides. About the other side, there were definitely, I believe, mistakes made, first of all, by the government, which decided to move the balance between two branches, legislative and judges, from one extreme to the other, and to do it quickly without serious discussion. And on the other hand, the alarming voices that we are moving from democracy to dictatorship, which was, I believe, wrong. But as a result, there are hundreds of thousands of people on one side who are afraid that we are becoming less democratic, and hundreds of thousands on the other side who are afraid that we will become less Jewish. I think it's very unfortunate. Yesterday, there was opportunity to make decisions on much more type of compromise. It was missed opportunity. I do hope that in the months to come, the lesson, I hope, is learned. Both sides are strong enough and at the same time cannot succeed without one another. We can succeed only as the whole, as one people in one state, Jewish democratic state. But we will see how seriously the lessons are learned. I hope they are.
Gil, there's a lot of talk in the United States about the fracturing of the state. Is Israeli democracy coming apart? What's your perspective?
I've been a little countercultural on this. I keep on speaking to what I call the snubbed 65%. Most people, most Israelis want access to their airports. They want unblocked roads. They want doctors who meet their appointments on the one hand, and they also want a government that represents not just the faction in power, but that represents all the people. And most Israelis have not been taken to the streets, although many have. And one person suggested that if there were as many Americans doing this, there'd be 18 million. So there's a lot of anger in the society, but there are also many people in the middle, and that's the tension. The tension is, and this I think is one of the themes of Natan's life and one of the themes of our book, is how do you make sure what I like to call the muscular moderates or the silenced majority, how do they speak up? How do we hear them? How do we cultivate a sense of dialogue? How do we bring out those people who don't want to destroy the other side, but want to find some kind of golden mean? And I'm not naive. I'm well aware of the deep tensions. One of the things that's so heartbreaking about this particular fight is that in so many ways, the judicial reform battle is a very technical battle that, as Natan was saying, could be compromised so easily. And over the last 6-7 months, there have been so many different creative compromises. Even at the last minute, yesterday, there were possibilities of compromise. And what do you need to have that compromise? And we see this again and again. You need goodwill on both sides, but you also need leadership. And while in many ways this is a clash of the millions, it's also a clash of 5, 10, 15, 20 people. If we can get those people to follow our president, Bougie Herzog, to follow the ideals of Natan's life, then we can find a way out of this mess. I'm not predicting it, but I'm calling for it.
Natan, was there a way of implementing judicial reform, for which, as Gil said, there is a important intellectual argument, without exposing these deep rifts in society? Or were these rifts already there and this debate has just thrown a light on them?
No, the rift is there. The tension was growing for many years. And I have to say, it's almost natural, because what it means to build a Jewish democratic state after 1,000 years of exile. There is no manual, no example to take of. And from the very beginning, from the first steps of Ben-Gurion, he understood that there will be big tension, and that's why he preferred to be very vague. And we don't have constitution because there are things on which we cannot agree, and so we have to learn how to live with these disagreements and to continue to be together. So it had to happen one or another day. But if maybe 70% of Israelis agreed that we have to have some kind of reform and to make better balance between these two branches of democracy. But the fact that it was decided to do it so quickly, from one extreme to the other, in 2-3 months, as if this coalition came to power for 2 or 3 months and not for 4 years, I believe it was a huge mistake. And on the other hand, the fact that this built-in disagreement, it was decided to use it to replace the elections, that we can replace the government simply by demonstrating our disagreement. It was a mistake of the other side. As a result, we had this huge conflict, which I hope is now reached its maximum yesterday. And now I think when both sides discover that the other side is strong enough, and you cannot make practically any serious decision about the future of the country without the other side, I think people on both sides understand it. So I hope now we will find compromise, and a compromise is really technical, is really easy. The moment in principle you decide that you want not to defeat the other side, but to live with the other side together and to build one country together.
Gil, one of the interesting analysis I've read of this is a lot of this dates back to Gaza, and especially the withdrawal from Gaza, the feeling that it was done quickly in violation of the rights of some people who lost their homes. Of course, bodies were exhumed, promises were broken, and then concerns about democracy seemed less, and that this is kind of unfinished business. Do you buy that as an important aspect of what's happening now?
In many of Benjamin Netanyahu's recent speeches, he's mentioned both the fight over Gaza and the fight over Oslo. And one of the things that's so difficult at this moment is that you have a left, and left and right are bad terms, but we'll use it as shorthand, a left with one narrative and a right with a counter narrative. And the two narratives clash. So indeed, I have friends give me 11 seconds and I can spin them into fury about what happened in 2005 over Gaza, or even in the 1990s over Oslo, how a small minority of people imposed a very dramatic and radical change that didn't build a consensus. And that's from the right. And my left-wing friends will equally spin to this small and radical faction, not that one, but now this new one that's in government, imposing violent changes on the government and on the country. So indeed, there are tensions that go back to what Natan was saying earlier in the 1940s, religious secular, between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim. But I also want to say that I've seen it in the last couple of months, two needles move, one from the right and one from the left. My friends on the left start many conversations by saying, well, of course we need some judicial reform. And I'm a little annoying, I'm a historian. So I say, 8 months ago, you weren't saying that. You're now acknowledging a need for some judicial reform. And my friends on the right, since March 27th, when the society also seemed to be at a breaking point, say, well, of course we can't go too far too fast. And I say, well, you weren't saying that in January, February. And this is where the leadership problem comes in. If we had leaders who were following our president, Isaac Herzog, saying, okay, look, we have some movement on both sides. Let's find that middle path, then we wouldn't be in this situation. But instead, I'm very sorry to say, yesterday we saw when the Knesset legislation passed, instead of the winners at that moment, the 64 coalition members reaching out with love and with empathy and understanding to those in pain, those really fearing they're losing their democracy, we saw that ugly picture of the smug selfie. And that has been going around and around in Israeli social media, showing the winners and the joy that they had. And that goes back to Gaza. That goes back to, this is our moment of revenge. And a politics of revenge in a democracy is a politics of violence and of, the Hebrew word is shesa, of division. And what we need is a politics of love and of bridge building, which is what Natan Sharansky's career has been all about. And what our book is about.
Let me ask you, one of the most interesting sections of your book to me was what you wrote about Bibi Netanyahu, for whom you've had a many decades relationship, going back to the time when he was a strong advocate for your release from Soviet prison. There are some who say that Netanyahu's lost his touch in this crisis, others who say he's too worried about his own self-preservation, whether from legal failures or in terms of his coalition. What's your evaluation of him during this crisis?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu not only was of great help in the struggle for the release of Soviet Jewry, and me personally, being diplomat in Washington and volunteered, in fact, to help in our struggle and give some many out-of-the-box ideas how to link struggle for Soviet Jewry with some major aspects of American-Soviet relations, and was very good and very effective, and I appreciated him as number one advisor after I was released from prison. Then, being minister in his government and as the head of Jewish agency, I have to say, he has tremendous contribution to our economy, to our political agenda, and you'll be surprised to the relations between Israel and Jewish people. For example, people don't remember it, but birthrights, which today is believed the most successful enterprise between Jewish people and Israel, would never come into being if Bibi Netanyahu, the prime minister, did not support it against all the other ministers. So he has many achievements. Having said this, I have to say that it is not good when one person stays at power for so many years. It's much better that you have 2 terms or 3 terms or 1 term, as it is in America and some other countries, because with the time, really having a very important influence on all sides of Israel life, at some moment you start believing that the most important thing which you can do for your country is to stay to power and continue your leadership. And then come all these problems when, in order to save your coalition, you're making all types of concessions, which you should not do, and you take all types of problematic steps and statements, hoping that after being reelected, you'll correct it. And I think here for the first time we have a government where Bibi Netanyahu is on the left side. He is by far the most left politically and in terms of state and religion in this government. And it's almost impossible position for prime minister to control his government when they are all on one side of you. And I think he has much less control of this government than in the previous cases. And that's why I see the only real good solution for the country could be broad coalition government, which is almost impossible to do if Bibi Netanyahu and Gantz will not make steps, which will be very bad for their political career, but very good for the country.
Gil, I know everyone has a view on Bibi. What's your perspective?
So I'll give you some California content. I would love to send Bibi Netanyahu to Southern California, and I'd have him visit the Nixon Library. And the Nixon Library should remind him that Richard Nixon, for all his achievements, détente to the Soviet Union and the breakthrough to China, and knew from the moment he resigned that the first line in his obituary would be the first president of the United States to resign in disgrace. And it drove him crazy for the years of his exile. And what breaks my heart as a Zionist, as a Jew, as someone who loves democracy, is that yesterday, Bibi Netanyahu potentially by himself rewrote the first line of his obituary, which will indeed start with some of the achievements that Natan said, but the second half will be, and left the nation in tatters. And that is why it is essential that he rewrite that line. And it's also kind of one of these things where, you know, from Back to the Future, where the characters are kind of being half written in and half written out of history. Right now, everybody's going, after all the good that he's done, and I've criticized Bibi on many things, but he has done many good things. How could he, in 6 months, bring in so much instability, have Moody's and all kinds of other financial institutions reassessing their faith in Startup Nation, have startup people threatening to leave? Why would he allow so much of the good that he's done to be undone for this and so quickly? And he has to understand that this is a leadership moment. And as I said, there are enough people in the society who want a change that maybe it's time to sit down with Gantz. Maybe it's time to think out of the box. But certainly, this is a moment to either protect his legacy or just give up, because he's just destroying so much of what he's built, what he himself has built.
Natan, another aspect that many have pointed to this is that this is reflects the further diminishment of the old Ashkenazi dominant Israel, that it's the rise of a Mizrahi population that has felt underrepresented and a rise of a Russian population, which you know, of course, exceptionally well, as you were instrumental in the Russian aliyah to Israel, Soviet aliyah. Does this reflect the changing nature, do you think, of Israeli society at a basic level?
I'm not sure. Look, no doubt that our society has many more faces, different faces than before. For example, if I think about Aliyah from the former Soviet Union, which changed a lot in this country. You cannot see this startup nation, this competitive society with many interesting aspects of life without this Aliyah. But to say that on this specific crisis, this Aliyah has special position or is playing special role, no. There are demonstrations on both sides of the screen, and some Russian new immigrants from the same families participate in one or another demonstration. But no doubt at the same time that this feeling of revolt against elites, that they were building this system for so many years without giving us opportunity to correct it. And now we have this opportunity and we have to do it quickly while we still have it. This element is there, and it's not very constructive, what I can say, yeah.
Gil, do you think this represents a turning point in terms of Israel's relationship with the diaspora? You've seen the many American Jewish organizations which have taken stands, many opposed to judicial reform, some in favor. But Is this a turning point? Is it going to accelerate a process that's already been underway? Will it not be that important? How do you understand it?
It's certainly a crisis, and that crisis opens up doors to opportunities, but also could be closing certain doors. I was speaking to a friend of mine who runs a program for rabbis here in Israel just a week ago, and things have changed in the week. But I said, well, what was the vibe? Did things feel very different? And he said, my rabbis went to the protests, and they were actually happy to see that there are people, there are Israelis who love them, who reach out to them. And rather than just seeing the New York Times view of the world, which makes every Israeli look like a gun-toting settler and Ben Gvir, they realize that there are many, many Israelis who are allies. And so I think we need to use this opportunity. When I say we, I say both sides. This is one of the themes of our book. This is a moment for American Jews to understand that you can't talk about Israel, capital I, capital S, as if it's one Israeli with, in the old days with the COVID temple giving out blue and white cookies. There are many different Israels. And by the way, we have to love all the different Israels. We have to figure out ways to work together with the different Israels. And this can be an opportunity for a real maturing conversation about how we, first of all, disagree with the government sometimes, but nevertheless love the country. My definition of patriotism, and it's about Americans' reaction to America, it's about Israelis' reaction to Israel, and also about Jews' reaction to Israel, is a patriot is someone who loves his or her country and his or her people because of the politics sometimes, and despite its politicians always. And you have to understand that sometimes you're going to win and sometimes you're going to lose. But you have to be able to go beyond that. And so I'm hoping that we can use this as an opportunity for maturation. I want to hear American Jewish voices saying, I'm going to fight the American Anthropological Association, which just yesterday decided to boycott Israel. I'm going to continue to fight BDS, even as I disagree with this government. And that's healthy patriotism. Defending your country. And this is the problem. The problem with the attack on Zionism these days is it's not just an attack on what Israel does, but what Israel is. And so I, as a patriot, I write a column in the Jerusalem Post every week. If I was just a cheerleader saying everything's perfect, it would be the most boring column in the world. So I do, as a loving patriot, as a loving Jew, as a loving Zionist, occasionally criticize the American Jewish community, criticize the Israeli Jewish community, criticize the government. But I never negate, I never demonize. And what happens today is too many demonize, too many negate.
Natan, I want to discuss some of the other issues that you raised in the book. And our focus is on Jerusalem right now, but there's also, of course, a lot going on in the West Bank and in the Palestinian Authority. You were very critical of Oslo because you believed it institutionalized an authoritarian dictatorship, Arafat. Mr. Abbas is coming to the end of his time in power, one way or another, and there's a lot of speculation about what comes next. What's your feeling? What's your perception of what's going on only a few miles away? And do you think there's the prospect for a change in the politics after this long period of first Arafat and then Abbas's non-democratic rule?
Well, I do feel that we are at the moment when we have the reason to be more optimistic, but it's not because of what was done with the Palestinians, but because there are now Abraham Accords. And I'll explain what I mean. My first article against Oslo Agreement was written 2 weeks after Oslo Agreement, when our Prime Minister said that it's good that Arafat doesn't have a human rights organization, Supreme Court, and free press, because that's why he will defeat Hamas much quicker than we can do it. So all the idea of Oslo then was like, we are finding our dictator, strong dictator, whom we'll bring to Palestinians. We'll say, take it or leave it, he will be your leader. We'll give him enough money, public money, into his personal pocket, $30 million every month. And he will, for us, he will defeat our enemies. And then I said that what we are helping to do, we are helping to destroy all the democracy, all the beginnings of democratic civil society there, and it cannot bring peace. Dictator will need us as the enemies. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. And the peace process with Palestinians didn't start yet, because it was all process built on how to make this or that dictator strong enough and our ally. In fact, the very beginnings of independent economy, dependent from the authorities, of civil rights organizations, of free press, they were all destroyed in these years. Now, at the same time, Abraham Accords, which is not, by the way, is not also with democracies. It's also very non-democratic regimes. But from the very beginning, it's built on people to people. You'll see from how to create public opinion, which will be friendly, and they'll feel that we need one another. We have so many tourists and actors and writers and filmmakers who are going in both directions. With Palestinians, we cannot have it, because anybody who will come as a cultural emissary from Palestinians, he will be simply killed. So the real peace process can start only from bottom up, from the people, from building together some civil society institutions. And that's exactly what's now happening between us and Muslim world. And inevitably, it will include also Palestinians. And then, as they're always saying, I want Palestinians to have all the rights that I have without opportunity to destroy us. And that's exactly what encouraging civil society, Palestinians means. So I believe we are only at the beginning of real peace process.
Gil, there's a perception in the United States that the PA security apparatus is breaking down. It's part of the reason for the increased number of Israeli incursions into the West Bank. Like I said, you're a few miles away. Is that your perception?
In many ways, the succession struggle over Abbas has begun. And I think the instability of the last year and a half in the Palestinian Authority, and we've seen the jump in terrorist attacks, is a reflection of that. Powerful forces, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, the PA jockeying for one another and trying to figure out how to go forward. And indeed, I echo what Natan said, that it was, I once asked Natan when we were writing the book, I said, what's the worst thing that the Israelis ever did to the Palestinians? And he said, impose that terrorist dictatorship on them with the Oslo Accords, because that caught them in a vice of undemocratic rule. It caught them in a vice of dictatorial rule. It caught them also, and it hurt us, in a vice of delegitimization and terrorism. And one of the interesting things, one of the exciting things about writing this book, and we call it a memoir festo or a manifestoir, it's using Natan's story to tell a broader story and to give broader ideas about dialogue, about dissidents, about democracy. And Natan talks in his own life about that freedom from fear that you have to have, that moment when you no longer fear the oppressor, even though he can control your body, he can't control your soul. And what happened in the Palestinian Authority was that same fear was now imposed on Palestinians, by the Palestinian Authority as a result of the Oslo Accords. And one of the goosebump moments, the many goosebump moments I had when writing the book with Natan, was we talked about this notion of exiting fear. And I came across a book about the Arab Spring, and one testimony after another from someone in Tunisia, from someone in Egypt, talks about that moment when, even though the tanks are coming at you, even though this may be the last moment of your life, you're free from fear. And of course, we Americans take that freedom from fear for granted. It's one of the 4 freedoms that Franklin Roosevelt promised us. But it's one of the things that everyone deserves everywhere in the world, and we have to try to spread it. And all too often, our foreign policy, when I say our, I mean the Western foreign policy, American foreign policy, doesn't free people from fear, but gives money to those who impose fear on the people.
Natan, the book Never Alone is divided into 9-year periods. The last 9 years as head of the Jewish Agency, before that 9 years as a minister, but of course, first 9 years as a dissident, facing the brutality of the Soviet system in prison. And of course, you're an expert in Soviet and Russian authoritarianism dictatorships. Maybe you could comment on the current Soviet conflict, current Russian conflict with Ukraine. And how do you see this ending? Does it end? And can it end with Mr. Putin having something other than victory, or is his own personal fortunes so tied up with the war at the moment that he has to fight until the bitter end?
Well, brutal aggression of Russia against Ukraine is the war of one person, because it is Putin's war. Nobody in Russia is really interested or has invested interest in this war. But it was started because Putin decided that he has to restore Russian empire. In the first years of his rule, when I met him a number of times in those first years, he was looking for recognition by the world. He was bewildered by the fact that President Bush and the other leaders are not ready to accept him as a superpower. And he was looking for this recognition. But later, he realized that he is the only real powerful leader in the world, because all the others are leaving in 2 years, in 4 years, in 8 years, but they're leaving, and he stays, and he made sure from the very beginning that he will stay forever. And then he, as a great leader, he must have a great mission. And he decided that his mission is the restoring of the Russian Empire. And that's why he was fighting in Caucasus, and that's why he turned Belarusia and puppet, Georgia, and now Ukraine. And he lost contact with the real world. He decided that he really believed that Ukrainians are not a nation. They will not fight. In 3-4 days, he will reach Kyiv. And it will become part of Russian Empire. He didn't realize that they're a real nation. He didn't understand how weak, how corrupted, that's why weak his regime is. And he didn't believe that the free world threatened by nuclear weapons, that's what he did, will really support Ukraine actively. So I believe that I believed from the very beginning that Ukraine will win. Because it is fighting for its right to be Ukrainian democratic state. People fight for their freedom and for their right to be a nation, but they will pay a terrible price because Russia is really big power. But the moment it will be, Putin become much weaker, and with few victories of Ukrainian army, he'll become much weaker. And we saw only recently that he is not in the full control of the station already. He will be overthrown by his own army, though at this moment it seems that he has full control. But a weak dictator has no chance to survive. And that, I think, will be his end. In the meantime, people suffer, and Jewish communities in Ukraine, not only Jewish, but Jewish, are suffering. In these very days, Jewish Odessa community, and Odessa as a city is paying a terrible price, and there are barbaric attacks just in these moments on Odessa. If there is some good lesson from this, is that Ukraine is fighting not only for its independence, it's for the right of the free democratic nations to exist without fear in this world. And that's why their fight has to be our fight too. And by the way, one interesting thing, the political prisoners in Russia today are sending me letters how my book, Fear No Evil, helped them, Navalny and Karamurza and the others. So it shows how the history comes back, and political prisoners recognize in the memoirs of political prisoners like me their own reality.
Let's go to some questions from the audience now. We're getting quite a number. Thank you so much. I'll just pose some of the questions to both of you, and please take them as you see fit. One member of the audience writes, are minorities in Israel now at risk of losing rights? Will the condition of women, LGBTQ communities deteriorate as a result of the current and possibly proposed judicial reforms, as well as the changing political landscape?
Gil, you start, I'll continue.
You know, I'm a historian, so I always say it's hard enough to predict the past. I can't begin to predict the present or the future. But I think that there's a lot of hysteria. People don't pay attention to the fact that the Speaker of the House is gay. People don't pay attention to the fact that we have more women combat soldiers than ever before. And unfortunately, we've actually recently buried a woman combat soldier from the Egyptian border when she was attacked by an Egyptian policeman. So there have been so many gains for minorities. I keep on giving my friends who are from different minorities a time travel machine, be they Arab, be they gays, be they women. I say, here, go back in time in Israeli history to any date. Where would you rather be? What moment would you rather be living? And I still think, and they still think that they'd rather be living in 2023. So are there warning signs? Yes. Are there members of this government who say just the most abhorrent thing? Yes. Does Bibi Netanyahu, at least every time he speaks, say this is going to continue to be, he said it just last night, a liberal democracy, and it's not going to be a halachic state, a state of medieval Jewish law? Yes. Does that mean that there's nothing to worry about? Yes. No, I wouldn't not worry, but I wouldn't start saying the mourner's Kaddish, the mourner's prayer over those groups and over our rights and over our ability as individuals and as collectives to thrive in the Jewish homeland, which continues to be a Jewish democratic state.
I only want to add one thing. Look, this government is, what, 6 months at power? You will not find one law which really passed, which undermines the rights of women, of gays. So you'll find a lot of statements, a lot of threats, a lot of proposals, which were all dismissed and which have no chance to be implemented because we are a democratic state with a lot of defenses of democracy, whether it is free press, whether it is strong oppositions, civil societies, and of course elections. So yeah, unfortunately, in this new political situation, the voices of these extremists are heard much stronger. But in the reality, in practice, and in practical laws which passed, nothing changed. And so I don't think there is a real threat. But on the other hand, as we know from the other fields, the more there is hate rhetorics, you always should be on guard. You always should be alarmed. You always should feel that you're warned and you have to deal with this. Yeah, we have to deal with this.
Another member of the audience writes, what do you think the U.S., meaning the U.S. government, should do in response to the ongoing debate about judicial reform? As you know, President Biden has been outspoken, some say, violating Israel's sovereignty in his comments. But what would be, from your perspective, the most helpful American posture?
Huh?
Well, frankly speaking, I don't think that American administration could play a big role. Let's say, can Israeli government play any role in your debate about abortions or about gun control, which are very important issues in America? To think that foreign governments can have any serious influence here. America is our great friend, not only great friend, the biggest ally, the most important ally. But when it comes to the debate about how we are constructing our Jewish democratic state, America, of course, it should express the hope that we will succeed in it. But how exactly, which paragraph in this reform should be approved and which not? Well, we don't know what to say. How American administration can know what to say.
There have been 28 weeks of mostly peaceful protests. In France, hundreds of people have been arrested in riots and demonstrations about raising the age of retirement. And I have not heard the Biden administration spend as much time, expend as much energy in trying to fix France as it has as it had in trying to fix Israel. Even worse, even more outrageous is I don't feel, either from the American Jewish community or from this administration, enough passion, enough anger about the oppression that's going on in Iran, the degree to which women are being shot and I'm sorry to say raped and abused in prisons because they dare to disagree with the regime, let alone if you dare to be gay. And so there is a strange kind of outrage gap. And it's very, very easy to sit and lecture Israel. And obviously from within, I lecture Israel about a lot of things, but I don't think it's necessarily the role of the administration. And I do think that there should be a lot more energy spent about how do we undermine the undemocratic, theocratic regime in Iran, which, by the way, not only targets little Satan, Israel, but targets big Satan, America, and a little less from the administration about how to fix Israel, which has its issues and is going along. Now, having said that, I also think that American Jews and American experts have a lot to teach Israel about constitutionalism. And frankly, we talk a lot about judicial reform in the context of separation of powers. We also, one of the things we know instinctively as Americans that Israelis don't do very well is distribution of power, decentralization. You have Los Angeles and California and so many smaller counties and the United States of America and the federal government. We understand as Americans instinctively how to take power and distribute it, not just in the three branches of government, but in different power centers. And in Israel, too much of the power flows to the Knesset and to the cabinet and to the prime minister itself. And that's why you need the balance of the courts, but you also need a more creative balance. And so expert ideas, absolutely. The experience of the American constitutional regime, absolutely. But this kind of condescending finger wagging, no, thank you.
John, we're getting, unfortunately, to the end of our time, but let me ask you, the last 15 years have seen what many call a democratic recession across the world, measured by such organizations as Freedom House, which count the number of democracies versus authoritarian regimes. You've devoted much of your life to promoting freedom and democracy. How do you understand, there are exceptions, but how do you understand this kind of worldwide slide towards less democracy, greater authoritarianism, seemingly in many different regions of the world?
Well, in different regions, there are different reasons. In many regions of the world, it is the result of this illusion that free elections means free society. And it's only free elections and free society. That's what democracy is. So there must be a process of building these institutions. And if you take Soviet Union and then 10 years of Yeltsin, it was too short period to build strong civil society institutions. So when Putin comes and tries to undermine them, he can do it easily. And I suspect that's things which are happening in the third world. But in Europe and America, it's something different. It's like waves. There was postmodernism when it was decided we don't need national states, we don't need religious states because it's all against freedom. People should not be separated by religion and by nationality. And as a result, a very decadent, a very superficial culture was created, and people want to belong. They don't not only want to be free, but they want to belong to the nation, to religion, and so as a result, there is a counterattack, and it goes from one extreme of building the states without any identity to the other extreme with strong identity. And because we need, as we know in the example of Israel and in general the world, and we are speaking about it again in the book, in order people will be happy, they must feel that they're free and they must live in accordance with their identity, that they belong to something bigger than their life. And so this counterattack of strong identity states, which is really sometimes is a real attack on democracy, it follows after this attack on identity. And I do hope that we will come exactly in accordance with Rambam. You go to one extreme, then you go to the other extreme, and only then you can meet in the center. So I do hope that we are now entering the stage in American and European history when we are coming back to the center. And by the way, Israel is exactly this, the struggle of the last months, that's exactly the struggle, how to keep the balance between being national state and free state.
Let me ask each of you one final question. Gil, what was the most important lesson you learned from working with Natan on his biography?
I learned that, as a historian, I often find all these gods with clay feet. And sometimes you meet somebody who lives his values. And by the way, we should also mention Natan's wife, Avital, who lives her values. And to see people who, from the moment they met, from the moment they both emerged with their identities and through their identity struggle, understood the importance of being free, they have lived their truth. And that's been a source of great inspiration to me, to see that at the end of the day, we live in a very materialistic society, and it's very important to achieve, and it's very important to have beautiful homes and shiny cars and great degrees. But the most important thing is to worry about your soul and to worry about your truth. And it was it was not just a pleasure, but fun and inspiring to learn from them, to befriend them, and to help tell their story to the world, because it's a story that we all need to learn about standing up for who you are. And sometimes the good guys win. Sometimes the little people stand up to this massive thing called the Soviet Union, and miracles can happen.
Natan, final question. From your book, Never Alone, Prison Politics and My People, as well as your life's work, what would be the lesson that you would want people to take away from reading the book and looking at your history?
Well, I'd like Jewish people always to remember that miracles happen not only when Moses took our people from Egypt, but they are happening practically in every generation. And American Jews are blessed to be part of this unique historic struggle. They showed to all the world, but first of all to ourselves, how big is our power when we are true to our identity and we go together in this struggle. And they forgot to tell the story to their children and grandchildren. So I want always to remind people two things. First of all, that if we are true to our ideas of belonging and being free, we are in a great power. We should not be afraid of anybody. And second thing, if you really want to change the world for the better, tikkun olam. And if you don't want tikkun olam, then you're not Jewish. Every Jew wants to be part of tikkun olam. Tikkun olam needs a lot of strength, a lot of energy. And the only source of this energy can be your identity, your roots, your family, your community. And if you're strong in it, then you really can change the world.
I'd like to thank Natan and Gil on the occasion of the publication of Natan's biography, Never Alone, Prison Politics and My People, as coming out in paperback, as well as the Hebrew edition that's just come out. Gil showing it there. Natan and Gil, I know it's getting late in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well.